Thank you guys for joining us. This is really exciting. Definitely exciting for the Motivation SIG, but also for all of the students that get to hear you guys share your thoughts. So I thought that we could start out with just a really quick introduction for everyone that has joined us so far. Maybe starting with Tony and then Sharon and then DeLeon.
Sure. So I'm Tony Perez. I'm an assistant professor at Old Dominion University. Is there any other info you'd like?
That's perfect.
Okay.
Hey, I'm Sharon Zumbrunn, and I'm at Virginia Commonwealth University.
Hi, my name is DeLeon Gray. I'm an associate professor, and I'm at Michigan State University this year as a scholar in residence. And I also am at NC State University, and that's the home base.
Great. Thank you, guys. So I have a series of questions for us, about 5 or 6, depending on how many we have time for. And these are all really great questions that we got from the RSVPs from the students. So I'm just going to start off with, maybe you can share your writing process with us. What works for you? What does a typical writing session look like? And how do you find joy while you're writing? What makes it fun for you?
Okay, I guess I'll jump in on that. I'll start with the joy question. I think it's a very good one. You know, when I feel like I wrote a really good sentence, I do get up and I do like celebrate, you know, when it's like really strong and I know it's gonna like, you know, it really touches on what I want to say. So I celebrate those victories because they don't happen as often as I want them to. So yeah, they matter a lot. My process is evolving. So what I'm doing currently is I'm just reading a lot. I notice that I write better when I'm reacting to things. And so rather than kind of saying I have to write this, you know, paper, I'm doing this, so let me just turn to reading the article that I need. I've been doing deeper reading lately and allowing my mind to just wander as I read, and it just goes to many different places. Just paper, printing it out, and just unplugging for the first 3 hours or so of my workday. And that's allowed me, and then when I come in, I then take my notes that I wrote and I, you know, put them into kind of like a database for myself. And now, you know, that I'm about to, you know, begin the process of writing something like new or a couple of new things, I just came from, you know, a public space today where I just had all of my notes printed out. It was about 40 pages, single space for, you know, the past month or so. I'm just highlighting what I think in my own writing is a fresh idea, makes sense, is very clear, meaningful, and then kind of building based on the best of, rather than kind of just building because I need a paragraph here and a paragraph there. Just starting with like the centerpieces of what I want to say, and I think that would lead me to more impactful writing than writing just, you know, a paragraph here and there. I gotta have something that's meaningful. So I know that's not the whole right. Oh, you know what? Can I just add, Tony and Sharon, one more thing? If I'm writing an empirical manuscript, I start with, you know, making sure my tables are clear and the message is clear. I just step back and say, what's the message based on, you know, the analyses, because we go through several different analyses before we get to whatever analysis it is in our paper that ultimately is there. And then the reviewers also challenge us and make us run different analyses sometimes. So I start there with, you know, the data as the centerpiece. It's kind of like the core of an empirical paper, and then I kind of just build out, you know, from there in both directions.
Sharon, would you like to go next, or shall I?
Go ahead.
Okay. So I actually share a lot of what DeLeon just mentioned, especially the piece about reading more to write more. If I feel particularly stuck, that's often a signal that I need to read more. And the more I read, which frankly is sometimes hard to find time to do, but the more I read, the better the flow of writing I find. But if I do get stuck, I really like to write method and results, because that can often get me in the flow of writing as well. So it sort of just depends on exactly where I am in the writing process, but I will often start writing a paper with method, the method section and results, because sort of, you know, similar to what DeLeon said, that's sort of the core of your story of the paper. And it's also fairly formulaic, so it kind of gets me in the flow. And then I move to, you know, discussion and introduction and sort of back and forth between those. The other thing is I try to write as the first thing that I do during the day. And when I say write, I'm meaning write very broadly. So it could be reading articles that I need to read for something or something like that. But yeah, I try to do that as the first thing that I do when my mind is at its most efficient, I guess, after what was hopefully a good night's sleep. And in terms of another piece of that was the joy in writing. So for me, well, yes, sometimes writing is frustrating, especially if you are experiencing some writer's block or something like that. I actually really, when I sit down to write, and even if I write for 30 minutes or an hour or whatever, that is my favorite part of this job, actually, because it's all the research and work that we've been doing coming to fruition in a paper. So I really, when I'm writing, I feel the most fulfilled when I've had like a good day of getting some words on the paper and having a manuscript progress forward. So I'd say that's my 2 cents to build off what DeLeon said.
So I can pick up there. I echo so much of what Tony and DeLeon said, in that I write first thing in the morning if I possibly can, and sometimes that means waking up before my house wakes up, or I find that if I can find a quiet place in my house to write and kind of get in that zone the first thing in the morning before my crazies wake up, that it gets me feeling pretty productive before, sometimes even before daylight. But it really just depends on the day. So I try to do that first thing. And Tony, you said if I get stuck, I would change that to, for me personally, to when I get stuck, because it seems to happen constantly. Like I find that I'm always stuck in some piece of it, and it's always shifting a little bit to be like, oh, frickin', this is so hard. Like, okay, can I manage what's hard right now, or do I need to shift a little bit and work on something that's more formulaic, like methods or results, like Tony and DeLeon were saying. Maybe sometimes it's even as like, oh, maybe I'll just format my references today. Good job, me. And so I find that when I am frustrated, that I lower my standards. This might be because my standards are too high. And it's sometimes because I haven't read enough, but I found this piece called The Myth of One More Source. So I can get down that rabbit hole of reading sometimes, and when I'm like, maybe I'll just kind of delay the inevitable of having to write this thing if I just keep on reading, because there is invariably one more source that I could find and read more and be more knowledgeable about this topic. But when DeLeon said, like this morning, he sat down with 40 pages of notes, same. I often have an ongoing page of just notes that is, I wouldn't want to really share with anyone else because it's a mess. And sometimes I don't even understand what it was that day that I wrote, but I really rely heavily on that really long page of notes and then reorganizing the notes. And there's often even called that organized notes or unorganized notes. And I switch the documents around. But I find that helps, that getting started and to maintain a habit of writing at the same time every day is really great, but also huge luxury. I get that doesn't work out for all students and faculty, even myself sometimes. And so I'm figuring out when in my day I can write and setting that up at the beginning of the week. So mapping it onto my calendar. So make sure I have time. And again, lowering my standards. Where do I have 15, 30 minutes to write? And capitalizing on those times to make sure that I get it in every day. And my process always ends with writing a note to myself that starts with all capitals. Next time, start here, : and then I write down exactly what I need to start so I don't waste any time the next time I pick that piece up in that transition. And I celebrate, just like Tony and DeLeon said, celebrate the small wins, because there's not a lot of big wins in this. Unfortunately, it seems like that big win is so far away sometimes, and that can be kind of demotivating for me. And so I celebrate the smaller wins, like a good sentence, or look at me, I did this and it was super hard today, and feel pretty good about that.
Yeah. Sorry, I just wanted to comment on something that Sharon said, and I appreciate the clarification of when I get stuck, because it's struggling to write and getting stuck and all those things is very normative in the writing process. So those things will absolutely happen. You know, just like many other things, some days it's going to flow nicely, but many days it's going to be a little bit of a struggle for sure, or sometimes a lot of a struggle. But yeah.
So going off of that, I wonder if we could kind of chase this down a little bit and talk as specifically as you're comfortable sharing about some of the actual things that you guys might do when you're feeling like you're just procrastinating, or maybe you haven't maintained that momentum and you need to get back into it, or you're experiencing some writer's block. What do you guys do when you're in that scenario?
So I can jump in. So one piece of advice that sort of bridges what we were just talking about in this is that I used to work on multiple writing projects at the same time. And we're always sort of juggling multiple projects, but I mean, like, I would try to write, like I'd have 2 or 3 manuscripts that I need to write, and I'd, you know, on one day write a little bit of one manuscript, and then another day try to address a different manuscript, etc. And I learned that that is not very efficient or productive for me. And I've moved to really having sort of a main manuscript that I'm focusing on all my energy on each day until it's done. So what that means is if I have, you know, if I'm working on manuscript A, whatever it is, that every day that I write, I do something with that manuscript. And that helps with, you know, one of a really frustrating experiences when you come back to a manuscript and you're like, I have to sort of reorient myself to where I left off. So I've learned to sort of, you know, really do something with the manuscript each and every day until that manuscript is submitted. And related to that, in terms of this specific question, the things that I do when I feel like it's hard to, you know, get down to writing and that sort of thing is I will do things sort of like what Sharon said about, like, it might just be organizing the references, or it could be double checking results or doing tables or something that, you know, often if I'm procrastinating, it's because I don't have the mental energy, or maybe I'm, you know, feeling like I'm not quite sure how to shape that introduction or discussion section. So I'll do things that I feel more confident that I can address, and it'll help me to feel accomplished for that day. So I look at writing as anything that moves that manuscript forward. So it's not just words to paper, but it could be, you know, it could be organizing the manuscript or creating tables or, you know, fixing references or whatever it might be.
Yeah, I would just jump on right to follow that. But I do the exact same thing. Anything that moves the manuscript forward or project forward, even whether it's like working on the data or reading or going to the library and getting books. But anything counts, including like journaling about how I'm feeling about this project, no matter how like where am I in this funk and journaling like why am I feeling this way. I count that as writing too, because that might help you figure out why you're why I'm in that space, and then it helps me figure out what to do next. I've also find that I get in the funk the most when I'm just starting the writing process, which is for me why the notes page helps a lot. Because I'm like, look at all the things I'm working with. I've got tons. Instead of the blank screen with cursor blinking, like you don't know what you're writing. You don't know what to write. And I'm like, oh, I don't know what to write. You're right, cursor. And so it's really hard for me to stare at that blinking cursor. So I find that when I'm really stuck and journaling sounds like super geeky and I don't want to do that, that I will just start talking to my, I'll use my notes and dictate to Siri on my phone and my notes about what I'm thinking. Like, okay, here's what I'm thinking. Here's what I need to do next. And that helps me like make a plan. And then I email that to myself. And then I can print that out, kind of like what DeLeon's saying, and like that's my plan, and I can write on that, and that becomes part of my notes as well. The last thing, I have a lot of tricks because I mentioned like I get stuck a lot, it seems. And I think that's normal, but I think when I do get stuck, I have this pocket full of friends that I rely on really heavily. I'll text them, I'm like, hey, I'm stuck with this project. Can I borrow your brain for 10 minutes? And that relationship is explicit, that they know that they're my person that I'm going to call and borrow their brain. And then they try to fit me in for a 10-minute slot sometime that day. And that really helps to talk through something. But Siri is the next best thing, in my opinion, if I don't have an actual human to talk to. I just made myself sound really lonely. I'm okay. I'll let DeLeon go.
Oh, no, I would add to that. You know, I hijack people's time a little bit, sadly. You know, just somebody might say, oh, how's it going? Oh, well, I'm thinking about da 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 da. You know, here's what I'm currently wrestling with. So I, skip the introduction, jump into the thing, and just kind of just listen sometimes for the reaction, because what I'm trying to like understand is if I'm saying something real or if I'm just in like academia land, just kind of just in my head a little bit. And so if they're like, what are you talking about? What? Then that helps me understand that I might not be saying things that are like meaningful and real, right? So it just causes me to rethink my idea. I recently had a conversation with a scholar who, in my eyes, I really, really respect. And I thought my idea was kind of clear. I thought that they would kind of understand. So I just set up a conference call, jumped on the call, and they were like, oh, all right. So I was, it just caused me to think, of course, you want to have faith in your ideas, but at other times, maybe, the idea isn't there yet. And so since I have multiple projects going at all of the time, if a project needs a little more time in the crock pot, then I kind of just, just acknowledge that, and then shift to something where I have more of a green light, that way I'm making progress. I would agree with Tony that it's hard to like shift in between projects, but if I'm stuck, it could be a number of reasons. One, I need to read more. Two, like maybe I'm working on something that isn't real. Or three, the idea is like half baked and I need more, just information to kind of put it all together, and so, or that spark just needs to be there. So just shifting really just, helps out, a bit with that. you know, because normally there's something that I have that is overdue. So, you know, I need to do something else, you know, as well. So just jump on that other thing.
Thank you all. So, relatedly, how do you deal with suffering setbacks, whether it's a rejection from a grant or a manuscript, or maybe you've gotten some negative feedback or anything in that category? How do you not allow that to dampen your self-efficacy and keep writing, and maybe even increase your writing self-efficacy over time?
There's a lot of haters out here. You know, joking. You know, but I would say when I submit to when I submit to journals, you know, sometimes the idea didn't come across just right. Sometimes it's the match between, you know, my work and the reviewers, because sometimes the reviewer just didn't get it, you know, and on those kind of decisions, I tend to like just kind of have like a short memory, and I just would submit the paper as is somewhere else rather than kind of just thinking that the reviewers were, you know, right about the paper, you know. So no paper is perfect. I acknowledge that, but sometimes stewing over something that, you know, doesn't, you know, deserve, you know, your, you know, thinking around like why something got rejected. Just, you know, sometimes it's better to attribute things to external things rather than kind of internal, you know, reason. So that's one way to get over it. Another way is just talking to people. Rejection is so normal in academia, you know, whether it's an award that you're going for, a paper that you're trying to publish, a grant, or a university that you're applying to for a position. Yeah, rejection is just normal. And sometimes, you know, it's just about fit at the end of the day, right? And so if the fit isn't just right, then, you know, it is what it is. And so I do also acknowledge that sometimes, you know, like, you know, my ambitions can sometimes get in the way of me thinking about, you know, just right fit for things, you know. So that's how I kind of bounce back. And I just have enough going at any given time that, you know, one thing doesn't, you know, kind of destroy everything. Kind of like stocks in a portfolio. The reason why, you know, you're supposed to have a balanced portfolio is because on any given day, you know, one stock could really tank. It could be losing money, you know, but that doesn't mean your overall portfolio is down the drain, you know. So, yeah.
Time heals all wounds. I like to put the rejection away for a few days. And it's a lot about, I totally agree with DeLeon. It's coming, you should expect it. I even often write myself sticky notes that say like, it's probably going to get rejected, just submit it. Just do your best to get it in there. And with the expectation that it's not going to like be a home run every single time, and I'm going to need to, you know, I expect that feedback, and expect that I'm not going to agree with the person that's giving me the feedback all the time. And right now for me, that's with my manuscripts and grant proposals and things like that. But I remember that a lot as a graduate student in my thesis, and getting feedback from my mentors. And I think that's a great place to like practice getting feedback. And I would say the best thing that I wish I did more of when I was a student is manage my own expectations by kind of coaching my advisor along, by asking specifically for what I needed. And I just kind of expected my advisor to really know. And that was not true. They don't always know what they're doing when it comes to giving feedback. And so thinking about what you need as a writer in your moment, wherever you're at in the academic process or in your academic career, what is it that you're looking for? How can the people who are reading your work right now help you? And what are you explicitly looking for? And if that's a super intimidating question, Do you want specific eyes on the structure? Is a specific section making sense? Are your ideas flowing? You can get pretty specific on the types of feedback that you want from people. And I think that scheduling that conversation and asking your mentor, how do you give feedback, kind of opens the door for a conversation that's necessary and not often had, unfortunately, between mentors and mentees. I can talk more about that, but I'll open it up to others.
And Tony, could I jump back in? You know, I want to comment on something that Sharon said about time heals all wounds. I think that is true, and I think that there are ways to think about what you want to do with the feedback. You know, on one hand, there are some ideas that you, or aspirations that you shouldn't necessarily give up on. So a rejection doesn't mean that you're defeated and that you lost. You know, you have the opportunity to be the comeback kid, right? You know, don't give up on that paper, you know, if the paper is really worth it, you know, right? You know, just kind of dig a little deeper, right? But sometimes, you know, we get into situations where, you know, this paper is just the next logical paper that we would have submitted, and it really isn't all that good, you know? And so we don't, sometimes I think the standards of academia make it so that we just feel like we have to do that next thing, which means that we're on the hamster wheel, which means that it's, you know, no wonder it got rejected. I didn't put the same level of thought into it, or it's not the same level of rigor as this other paper that I wrote. So, you know, the ideas really have baked at the end of the day. And so, you know, the rejection can be a reality check. You know, at the end of the day, it still sucks because regardless, you lost time, right? You know, but, you know, it's there's a lesson in it, either about persistence or about saying, you know, hey, dig deeper here. You know, regardless, you need to dig deeper. It's just a question of, do you need to dig deeper on this particular idea, you know, or is it another, you know, idea that you should instead be digging deeper on, you know, before sharing it out. But time definitely does heal. And there are instances where stuff has gotten rejected. You know, I really kind of sat on one of the papers that I wrote for years, and then ended up, you know, resubmitting it to a different journal, and it ultimately got accepted into a very, very reputable journal. But it took me years to get back to it, just because I didn't know, I didn't want to give up on the idea, but I didn't quite feel emotionally ready to kind of approach it, because it just took so much out of me. It went through 3 rounds of revisions and then got rejected. So yeah. It was hurtful, you know. But eventually I got back to it. And when I did get back to it, it took a lot of, it went through 3 rounds of revision, and this time got in, you know. And so yeah, it just, you know, but I was ready for the fight. Last time I was like, why do they keep asking me to revise? You know, I thought I answered all these questions before. This time I was like, you know, I don't care. I'm going to do what it takes, and it's going to make it in, you know. And the paper is better the second time. It was much better.
So sorry, Tony. I don't know if you're ever going to be able to talk. Totally with that. I feel like I'm remembering this paper, something similar to what DeLeon saying, and there were so many things that when it got rejected, I'm like, what are you talking about? And then after several more rounds of revision at a different journal, I was like, oh, wait. And then I went back to the original rejected. I'm like, oh, now it makes sense. And so sometimes you're so in the weeds and so close to it that you can't really see understand feedback as it's given, and it's just part of the process. And so having a few other people to talk it out can help that too. Okay, Tony, I'm done, I promise.
No, it's all good. This is all great stuff that, of course, I'm going to echo quite a lot of. You know, sometimes for me, so first of all, if I get a revise and resubmit, I feel like that's a win, because you know, I get another, to use a sports analogy, I get another at bat, right? So I don't look at rejection as rejection until you know, it is rejected from that journal. And like Sharon said, sometimes I need to, you know, I'll read the letter from the editor because you get that email, you see it's from the editor, you're like, oh my gosh, what is it, right? And then when you see it's rejected, it can be pretty painful. So I just sort of feel disappointed, put it away, and then revisit it when I can be sort of look at it with a clear eye toward what can I gain from this. So I think, as others have said, rejection is the norm. The most successful scholar that you can think of in your mind that you look up to has been rejected more than not. So, so rejection is the norm. And I think it's important to frame reviews as an opportunity for other, really good people to give you feedback on your manuscript. So I really try to look to the review to take out what I can use, basically. So what is helpful to me in terms of improving the paper, whether I'm resubmitting it as a revise and resubmit or whether I'm about to send it somewhere else. And sometimes I just, some reviewer comments I feel like maybe don't help me advance my paper, or maybe they didn't understand something that I was trying to communicate, which means that I need to clarify what I'm trying to communicate. So I really try to sort of frame it as an opportunity to learn how to write better, how to present my work better, etc. And then to just sort of move on to the next journal. So I really try to take that try to frame it as information, not about me personally or about my ability as a researcher or a writer, but just as an opportunity to get some good feedback on my paper that I can use to help shape the paper maybe for the next journal. And the other thing I'll say is some of you may already have had opportunities to review for journals. And if you haven't yet, you will. But when you do, keep that in mind as a reviewer as well. I mean, I try to review manuscripts, even ones that I recommend to reject, with an eye toward what would I want if this were my manuscript and someone was reviewing it for me. So, just that, I know this isn't really about reviewing, but keep that in mind when you're reviewing. Review so that you're helping the author or authors, improve their paper, improve their research. But whenever I get rejection, that's what I try to look at it as an opportunity to improve.
Wonderful. Any last thoughts on that one before we move on? Okay, great. So since we're a group of students, I thought maybe you guys could give us some advice on how to navigate some long-term projects that we might be facing, like dissertations, for example. Specific tips for prioritizing and triaging writing goals, and really, getting it to happen before it gets overwhelming.
I would say in terms of the actual writing, I mean, after you pass the proposal phase and you go and collect data and all that kind of stuff, once you actually sit down to write, it only takes about 2 or 3 months to get that thing finished, so it doesn't have to be a forever move, a forever process. The dissertation moves as fast as you want it to move, and I think there are 2 reasons why, well, not 2 reasons. One of the causes of students getting stuck that I see has less to do with the dissertation itself. Sometimes they get stuck because they don't have a next move. They don't know what their next move is. So I can't say that that's true for everyone that I've seen, but sometimes if right, that you have a job lined up or you feel that you definitely will be employed after this period of time, that vision for like where you're headed is enough to say, okay, well, this has to be done so I can move on to that. And that could like the fire and the spark. So thinking past the dissertation, I think, is the biggest thing, right? It's not just for the sake of publication. It's also, what am I about to do with my time after I'm done? And when do I want to do that thing? So like lining up those professional goals around like job market or, you know, just searching for jobs, etc., with the dissertation like process to figure out where these things actually can come together, you know, and where they're like, you know, where you could like put your foot on the gas with your dissertation and where you can't, you know, because there will be these critical windows where, I mean, you have about 2 or 3 weeks straight to just write with like not a lot going on if you're searching for jobs and like on the, you know, trying to finish up your dissertation. So I would just recommend thinking about both a little bit at the same time, because thinking about the job market also can help feed the rigor that goes into your dissertation a bit, you know, because you know that people are going to ask you about it, or you might want to present some of this work at a job talk. So just think about them as going together. Think about it as a message that, you know, will be shared, or, you know, the first couple of publications you might have when you get into your next role, and approach it from that standpoint, because at some point you're not going to be a student anymore, but that document will still have some relevance in your life. So just think bigger and more long-term about it beyond, you know, just the dissertation itself. You know, what does it set you up to do? It doesn't have to be perfect either, you know, right? So if there's some really deep thinking, my advisor used to say that, you know, in grad school, you have the most time to read that you'll ever have, really, you know, as a scholar, which is sad but true, or it feels that way to me. So taking advantage of the reading and thinking about what the work sets you up for is a huge thing, you know, and that could take off some pressure of having to feel like your document needs to be perfect. You know, it needs to be thoughtful, you know.
Yeah, I find this is personally one of the most challenging things, is figuring out what projects to prioritize when and how to manage long-term projects. You know, while I talked about focusing on one sort of writing project at a time, I still have several other projects going on. So what, you know, some are in the conceptualization stage, some are in the writing stage, some are in the data collection stage, et cetera. And I actually, you know, one of the real specific ways that I manage that is I have a big whiteboard in my office that Ariana has seen, but it sort of lays out all the different projects that I have in those different stages. And this isn't something that I made up. I got it from, I think I got it from not Pat Alexander directly, but Pat Alexander, I think, has her students do something like this in her lab. So I sort of borrowed it from them. And given Pat's productivity, it's probably a pretty good method, right? So, so that helps me sort of see my progress and also see where I have a backlog. Like if I have a bunch of projects that are in the writing stage, you know, maybe I need to cool off on adding more new research to my plate, because then it's just going to continue to, you know, to get into that backlog. So that's one specific strategy. Another thing is really just piggybacking off of what DeLeon said, in that, you know, and this is something I talk about with my students and also do for myself, but I think about what is sort of the, and this can be a moving target, but what is the next big goal or the next big thing that I need to plan for? So when you're a grad student, it might be getting a job as a faculty member. So planning things so that you start with, okay, if I want to have a faculty job by this date, you know, let's say fall 2020 or fall 2021, whatever it might be, when do I need to be finished my dissertation? When do I need to have this paper out? When do I need to do X, Y, and Z? So you sort of work backwards from those kinds of important dates. You know, for me as an assistant professor, I was working backwards for a while from, all right, when do I submit my tenure materials, right? And then, so it can change as you progress through your career, but like DeLeon said, think beyond your dissertation. It's not just about getting your dissertation done, but you you know, we live in a world, or our profession is a world where there are some strict deadlines, like grant deadlines and things like that. But the most important thing that we do, if you're a faculty member at a research university, is publish, and there are no deadlines for that. There is no deadline for your dissertation, other than, you know, maybe you have to finish your doctorate in 8 or 10 years, whatever your doctoral program has in place. But like, it's easy to let those things sort of slip through the cracks, or put those things off when you have when you feel like you have other deadlines that you need to address more quickly. So I would think about, okay, you know, as a grad student, it's probably, all right, I'm going to be getting a job. You know, I want a job in, you know, let's just say fall 2020. Well, guess what? Jobs are being posted now for fall 2020. So where do I need to be in my dissertation if I'm applying for jobs now, and I'm going to be, you know, potentially presenting my work at a job talk, right? So I would really think strategically in that way. And like DeLeon said, think beyond your dissertation, think about the big picture and plan backwards from there.
Mm-hmm. So I'll jump in there, and I totally agree with all the things that Tony and DeLeon said about thinking about the next step after grad school and the next, you know, where does this work project you? And then the backwards calendar, like how to get to that goal. But I'd say that those things are what I find is my students seem to know that. What they have a hard time is really learning this new genre of a dissertation. The hard part is that you only write one. You only do this genre one time. So you're writing it the first time and the last time. And that's horrible. Like, the next time I write my dissertation, I'm going to do so dang well. I can't wait to do it. It's going to be so good. And that you just really don't know a lot about that genre as a student. And so I think it's really important to have a village of other doc students and people who are going through this, either an in-person, maybe it's at your university or your institution, or maybe it's a virtual village, to help you understand what that process is and what those tasks might look like, and help you understand that it's about breaking it down. And so I have my students break it down even to like 15 or 30-minute chunks. So if you've got a goal is to finish your methods section, well, you're not gonna get that goal done today. So what are the tiny chunks of getting your methods section done for this work? And then how do those 15-minute tasks line up with your calendar? And seeing that really in play can help you figure out where you're estimating time well, or in my case, not so well, because I tend to not do that very well. So I think it's about breaking it down and understanding what's really important, like what are the tasks you can break down there, and also coming to terms with you're not probably going to be really good at this yet because it's the first time you've written a dissertation, and being new is hard. And so with that, I will put a plug in here for self-care and therapy. Therapy is dope, and I think grad students, particularly those nearing dissertation land, should check out their university counseling services just to have somebody in the wings in case they need them.
Any last thoughts for that one? All right. So being mindful of time, I'm going to try and fit in one more question. But if anybody has to jump out, feel free. And thank you so much for your time. This has been really great. So our last question is going to be focused on a publication pipeline. And sometimes this can feel like a black box, like how do we get a publication pipeline? How does this happen? So I was hoping that you could share some of your experiences with this developmental aspect of your careers and how you got to where you are now from where you were when you were in our shoes as a grad student, maybe even in your first year, second year, or in the dissertation phase. It's a big one.
So what is the meaning of life, right? Like, let's end with a small question. So I will say that I think your dissertation is kind of your springboard into the next several years of what you will likely be focusing on, and at least in a related way. And that's not always true, but for many people it's true. For me, that was true. And for me, it was something, it was an area that I wasn't exactly like in love with. It wasn't my favorite thing ever. There was a need for the work, and it seemed ripe, and it was related to what I was doing, and it directed several studies thereafter. Um, and and I didn't feel like I could really leave it because it's kind of what I was doing and that I was known for. So I'll say that it's kind of felt limiting, and I'd be interested to see if Tony or DeLeon has felt this way as well. But I didn't really feel like I could move too much away from that because I was tenure track, and I was trying to kind of like make a pipeline of work. One project then was related to the other work, and they kind of go together. That's not to say that I only published in one area, but most of my projects were with that. And I was building relationships with schools who were interested in that work, and then that led to other projects as well. But that just starts to gain momentum. You start branching out to work with more people, and then you're working on other projects that they're leading. And I would say that that's been the best part of it, is that it's really widened my circle, my network, and who I publish with, because I've stayed on that track, so that I'm working with them, and that momentum gets even greater. That's been really nice, but that has taken me a lot longer than I expected it to take, honestly. And some people find that in grad school, and that pushes them. I didn't have that really in grad school, and so it's taken me a little bit longer.
I would say that I feel like I'm still I mean, you're always evolving, and so yeah, so there are things that I see on my record that, you know, I'm really excited about, and there are things that I see on my record that I'm not as excited about, because the standard, you know, is, you know, changes, you know, as you're exposed to more, and you just kind of just see more. So I guess getting to, you know, where I am now has required, you know, I think at the end of the day, you have to be strategic, you know, so there's always institutional demands, and there are your personal goals, and they go together sometimes, and other times they don't, right? Every project that I work on does not have the equal chance of resulting in the same number of papers to come out of them. But some projects are really, really meaningful to me, and they can provide me with more insight and perspective. And, you know, I value those. So I've taken probably more risks, you know, as I was leading up to tenure, and I thought that I had, you know, enough publications and, you know, grant dollars to make it over the hump. I took a few more risks there. In the beginning, I didn't take as many risks, but my work also didn't come across as having as rich of a perspective. And I felt like, you know, scholars who are very senior challenged me to like think about my perspective, and also think about like what, you know, the field might need from me, you know. So and that's just kind of just a bigger challenge than just a paper. So yeah, just I guess for me the standard has shifted from only thinking about productivity to thinking about productivity and impact. You know, but if I had to choose which one matters more at this moment, impact matters more to me at this moment. But I can say that having crossed the tenured threshold, although, you know, at some day I do want to go for full professors and all that jazz. So like productivity still matters. So I don't know. I think I worked with people. Service is really my secret sauce, honestly. I've met so many people serving on different committees for Division 15, Division C, and it's really enriched my work, but also exposed people to my work who I might not have read their work before. They might not have read mine, but, you know, it gives me a different perspective on my work. And, you know, it also exposes them to what I have going on as well. You know, so service matters. I know people say don't do a lot of service and all that jazz, but for me, it's valuable. I think the things that, you know, one finds valuable, whether it's inside of academia or outside of academia, those things can enrich your perspective and like add to like the hardiness of your work. So you gotta do those things, especially if they're a part of just kind of your fabric, and strategically figure out the rest of the process, and just be mindful, you know, put up numbers. As LeBron James says, you know, you can't make none if you don't shoot none, you know? So that's a strategy part of it. Collaboration, etc., can like help out with that. But on the other side, you know, keeping my eye on meaning has given me kind of a larger sense of like purpose in the work, and it just takes time because I'm learning how to write, you know, and like structure my time and my projects and my collaborations all over again.
Yeah, I mean, I see this as in a couple of ways, and of course, I agree with everything that Sharon and DeLeon said. But you know, I really think of this as sort of the central identity process of our field, in that, you know, what we do in terms of our research agenda is kind of who we are as an academic. And that is a constantly developing thing. So you might branch off into new areas at some point, or you know, you might stay more narrowly focused in a particular area, but this is something that's really going to develop over time. And what I would encourage you to do is to, and this is difficult to do, I think, it is for me, but is to think not just about your dissertation study, but think programmatically. So one challenge I think of the dissertation is students often want to like do everything, answer every research question they have in their dissertation. You know, work with your mentors and your advisor on sort of how to narrow in a good quality dissertation, and save some of those ideas maybe that get cut out for the next study. So you want to think programmatically. So with each study you do, whether it be your dissertation or whatever other ideas you have, think about it like, how can I build from what I learned from the last study I did? What new questions does the last study I had raise? What questions was I not able to ask in that last study? Because regardless of whether it's your dissertation or on a grant or whatever, you can't just possibly answer every question. No project is perfect, and you're going to have more questions. So try to think programmatically rather than just about the next study, if that makes sense. And again, I think this is really challenging. But it'll also be helpful in guiding you when you do get to that faculty position and you're in a new environment and everybody wants to pull you into their project. And this is especially true if you come with you know, a strong background in quantitative or qualitative methods. Folks are going to want you on their project for you know, I mean, I think because they genuinely want to collaborate with you, but also, you know, maybe they don't know how to do a particular method and you do, and they want to pull you on. Just always keep in mind, like, who are you as a scholar? What kinds of questions are you interested in answering? How does, not to sound completely selfish, but, you know, how does the next project you're doing serve that program of research that you're interested in creating? Knowing that your program of research is an evolving sort of thing. So for me, I mean, my dissertation sort of led into what I did for my postdoc, which has led into the work that I'm doing now. So it's sort of built, you know, I definitely built off of my dissertation, in terms of what that program of research is. But I'm still learning, and I have learned to be more sort of programmatic in my thinking about the work that I'm doing and the next study that I'm doing, and how I can, I try to think about, okay, I could do this study, which will tell me this, and then the next study I can build off of that in this way, sort of depending on how the study pans out. So it's important to think programmatically, and also think about who you are as a researcher and that sort of thing.
Thank you.
Can I just add one thing too? Because I do think it's very important to think about, just not getting, used, right? On the other hand, I also think about the fact that, sure, there are people out there who just want to help you, but the reality of it is, some people don't have time for that, or they don't feel like they have time for it, right? To just help somebody. So, but they have knowledge too, and I might want to, learn from them, right? So I want to give a little bit, and the thing that I can give, it could be my skills in a particular area, it could be my perspective, it could be, just information, in some form. It could be grunt work. But if that gets me closer to the information, and I need that information to become a better scholar, then, me farming out my skill set isn't that bad, but that's not always the case. And sometimes there's not much to gain, just the pressure that you feel that you should be helpful. In those instances, I would say that saying yes can come back to haunt you. And I have said yes in those instances and haven't really gained much from them, but they still persist now because there's still papers that, I probably shouldn't have said yes to, but I said yes, and now I gotta, just follow through with them. So be choosy about it, but don't be afraid to share what you have to get what you need.
Yeah, no, and I totally agree. And but it is, I think it's important to be thinking about how, I'm always looking for the win-win, or sometimes the win-win-win, right? So how does this serve the goals of myself and my collaborators? And that's important to think about. I also think, to DeLeon's point, I also think this changes over time as well. So when you're on the tenure track, you might need to be really careful about making sure you're being really focused on that, program of research, and showing that you have a program of research, et cetera. And then when you move to associate, you're going to have a little bit more flexibility. And then when you move to a full professor, then you have even more flexibility. So that might be a time where, you have to think about sort of where you are in terms of your career goals and your place, and how much you can give of yourself versus other times. And I hope to be someday a full professor who's giving of themselves and helps, the new faculty coming up.
Wonderful. Any last quick takes before we say goodbye? All right. Thank you all. Oh, go ahead, DeLeon.
No, I was just going to echo Sharon's point about self-care being important.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's important. And there's different ways people put it together. So I want to echo that, and add, your version of self-care is yours, right? It's self for a reason, You know what you need. Give yourself what you need to be your best self. Some people need less, right? Or less of something, right? Maybe not less overall, but less of something. If you need less of something, also don't be ashamed of that. If you want to geek out and just do your thing and just, produce, and you got it in you in that season, go for it, because there might be a season where, things might be different. You never know what comes up. Life comes up. health complications arise, etc. So if you got the juice right now, go while you have the juice. But also, listen to your body at all times, because that's how you remain, your best. And, you're not any good to anybody else if, you're not around, so take care of yourself so you can be around for the long haul.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really like the idea of seasons because I think it's so true. Just academia has seasons. You're going to have seasons in your personal life, and sometimes those seasons aren't jiving on the same level. And so being just mindful of how you're in it all, I think is important.
I agree.
Wonderful. Okay, well, I'm gonna end us here. I so appreciate you all. Thank you so much, and I hope to get to see you soon.